second part of chapter 5, now that we've covered the skin and the epidermis, now moving into the other layers and other parts of the integumentary system. So, of course, underneath the epidermis, we have the dermis. So this gives that structural strength. So CT, this is connective tissue, has lots of fibers. So we talked about connective tissue in chapter 4, but things like collagen, elastic, and reticular fibers. We get fibroblasts, those macrophages of the immune system that engulf bacteria, and those fat-storing adipocytes. It does contain nerves and blood vessels. Again, our epidermis didn't have any blood vessels. Again, hair is going to start growing, or those follicles grow in the dermis. We get some smooth muscles. There are some glands here, and also the lymph. So a lot of stuff happening here in the dermis. Now this is where our sensory function is mainly going to occur. So again, whether it's pain, itch, tickling, etc., most of the sensory functions of the integumentary system are provided by the epidermis, because that's where the nerves are innervating. So that's where they are mainly found, rather than out on the epidermis. So there are two layers of the dermis that have different thicknesses. So the papillary layer and the reticular layer. So the papillary layer is superficial. It's the farthest out, so closest to the basement membrane and that epidermis. It's areolar. So think about that areolar connective tissue where we have lots of elastic fibers, and it's like some spaces, some gaps, kind of airy-like. So those elastic fibers, they also have dermal papillae. They have that capillary bed with lots of blood vessels. And the friction ridges are actually what make our fingerprints. So that's happening here on the papillary layer. So those whorls of ridges there that do those, as well as our touch receptors. And again, the free nerve endings to sense that pain. So then underneath that, deeper away from the outer layer, is the reticular. So this has dense, irregular connective tissue. So lots of collagen and elastic fibers, a little bit of adipose tissue here. This is where the hair follicle is going to be. We get lots of nerves, those oil glands, sweat glands, and then some heat sensors are going to be in that reticular layer. Now our cleavage lines, or tension lines, these are elastic and collagen fibers that orient in some directions more than in others. And so the importance of these cleavage lines that you can see here on this diagram is they're very important in surgeries. So if you're going into surgical tech, or in nursing or healthcare, especially related to surgery, you'll be learning more and more about these cleavage or tension lines. So what happens is if the incision, so the cut, is parallel, then there's less gapping, so there's much faster healing and less scar tissue. So again, when making incisions, it would be better to go in parallel, like we see here in C. We would get better healing than if we're going against it, like we see up here in B. So again, knowing where these cleavage lines are, these folds that occur, again, helps with knowing where to cut. However, or also, in addition, whenever the skin gets overstretched, it causes these stretch marks to occur. Now, under that dermis, we have the subcutaneous tissue. Again, this is deep to the skin, so all the way at the bottom is where we're going to get this subcutaneous. So again, epidermis, we have the dermis, and then the subcute. So this is also called the hypodermis, so lower dermis. It has a loose connective tissue, again, collagen and elastic fibers. The cells found here are fibroblasts, the fat-storing adipose, and then those macrophages as part of our immune system. These actually contain about half of the body's adipose tissue is found here in this subcute area. And so thinking about the role of fat, that means that this layer is especially good for energy source, but also insulation. So we think about like our polar bears or hibernating animals. They get this thick layer of adipose tissue there in that subcute area so that it helps insulate them, as well as some padding to provide some protection. Now, whenever we're giving or you are giving injections, There are multiple types, but there are three main types of injections. So we have intradermal. So this is actually into the dermis. So for these, it's important that the skin is really tight, or taut is the word. And then the needle is really shallow at a shallow angle. So again, we can see here we're putting it into the dermis. So the injection, the needle needs to come in kind of in an angle here so that it goes underneath that epidermis and then right to the dermis. A subcutaneous injection would be going through the epidermis, through the dermis, and down into that subcutaneous layer. So in these, we're going to be pinching the skin and using a shorter needle to gain access. So you're going to need a tight, the skin to be tight for intradermal. We use the folds for subcute. And then another one, not part of our integumentary, but just while we're talking about them, intramuscular. So now we're going below the epidermis, through the dermis, through the subcute, down into the muscle underneath. So these are going to use long perpendicular, or long needles that are perpendicular. So just straight down through the skin into that layer rather than at an angle that we get when we're going into the dermis or the subcute area. Now, what are some of the other parts of the integumentary system? So these accessory structures. So one of them is hair. So of course found everywhere on the human except the palms, the soles, the lips, nipples, parts of the genitalia, and then the distal segments of our fingers and toes. All right, so this hair structure and coloration changes as we age. Of course, our hair gets gray as we get older. So a couple different types here of hair. So the lango, so this is delicate unpigmented hair. So this is what's found on the fetus. Then we get terminal hair, which is long and coarse, has some pigment to it on the scalp. So the eyelids, the eyebrows, that's associated with puberty. So on our genitalia, the axilla, pubic, in the face. So those are terminal hairs. And then we also have some vellus hairs that are fine, short hairs that cover the rest of the body. So we think about our thicker hair again on our head, or some of the thicker hairs are terminal hair. The thin, really fine hair is the vellus. So looking here a little bit about the hair growth. So the growth stage occurs if the cells at the base as the hair elongates. Then they go into a resting stage where the follicle shortens, kind of just holds the hair there in place, it rests, and then the hair falls out and then new hair begins. So it goes through this repeating cycle of resting growth, resting growth. So the amount of time spent in each stage depends on the type of hair, again, whether it's terminal hair or not, as well as the location. And then so regular hair loss means that hair is being replaced. So if your hair is, you brush your hair, of course, and it comes out, then it means it's also being replaced because it's triggering the growth stage. Of course, permanent hair loss is pattern baldness, is the most common cause there. Alopecia areata, this is spot baldness. It's most likely due to some type of autoimmune where the immune system is attacking the hair cells. Now, if we look at the color in the muscles, so color is caused by varying amounts of melanin. So again, just like our skin color, hair color is also based on the melanin. So it can be kind of black and brown or red, and that color is controlled by multiple genes. So it's not just one or two, it's several genes working together to determine that melanin production. There are also some muscles associated with the skin. So we think about the erector pili. This is a type of smooth muscle. This is going to be those goosebumps that we get. So those extend from the dermal root of the follicle out to the papillary layer, again, right next to the basement membrane and the epidermis. So that contraction, though, causes the hair to stand on end. So that happens to us, but also think about animals like cats and dogs where their hair stands up is due to those erector pili. But then it also, again, goosebumps that we get from movement as the skin is pushed up causes those goosebumps. In addition to the hair and the muscles, we also have various glands, so especially our sweat glands or sebaceous glands. So we have holocrine, which is the death of the secretory cells, and then we have some oily secretions, that's sebum, here. And these are going to be used to prevent drying, but it also inhibits some bacteria, so they can't grow well in those oily secretions. So most empty, though, into the hair follicle. Again, a few exceptions is where we don't get hair, so the lips, the eyelids, and the genitalia. But otherwise, that sebum is emptying into the hair follicle. So it's released by the sebaceous gland, and then that sweat or that sebum goes into those hair follicles. Then the sweat glands or sudoriferous glands, so there are two types, typically called apocrine and merocrine, but apocrine can secrete in a merocrine or holocrine fashion. All right, so we have echocrine or merocrine glands. So this is the most common of these. So we have quite a few of them on the palms and our soles. So they have simple tubular glands. They open directly onto the skin, so they have their own pores. It's a coiled part of the dermis, the duct again exiting through the epidermis to allow release. These make an isotonic fluid, meaning it's the same solute concentration as our cells. So it contains mostly water and some waste. So again, the skin can serve as a excretory or waste removal process because of these glands. And these are particularly important for regulating our body temperature. Now the apocrine glands, these are the ones that become active in puberty. So this is whenever boys start needing to use deodorant, girls as well. But it's due to the overactivation or the activation of these apocrine glands. So again, simple coiled that are tubular. They usually open into the hair follicle rather than directly out onto the skin. The secretion here is an organic compound. It's odorless, though. When acted on by the bacteria, that's when it becomes nasty. Okay, so the secretion itself doesn't have a smell. It's the bacteria that grow on there. So again, frequent bathing and good hygiene removes the bacteria to prevent the smell. So these are found in the axilla, the genitalia, and around the anus, but these are not involved in regulating temperature. Now, a few other glands, the ceruminous glands, these are modified eccrine glands that are on the external auditory canal. So we think about earwax is what's secreted, which is correctly called the cerumen, and it's composed of sebum, so again, same as those sweat glands, and then secretions from that ceruminous. So the function here is that it combines with hair, but it prevents dirt and insects from getting in. So even if they move into that external canal, the earwax traps them to prevent them from going any further. And then we also have mammary glands on the skin. So these are modified apocrine. So again, not involved in temperature regulation, but of course these produce milk. Now some other structures here are the nails. So this is a thin plate of layers. This is dead stratum corneum. So again, that outer layer there is what's happening here. But again, it's filled with keratin that has become hardened. So we have the nail body, which is that stratum corneum, and that what we actually see. Then we have that cuticle, is the corneum superficial to the nail body, which is called the hyponychium, is the corneum beneath the free edge. Then we have the matrix and the nail bed. These cells give rise to the nail, so they're actually generating those cells. And then finally we have the root. So the nail root is covered by the skin, and it extends from that matrix. All right, now a little bit about the physiology of the system. So essentially how it works, not only the different parts, but how does it function? So again, that protective layer protects against abrasions or cuts. Sloughing off and the removal of the skin cells removes bacteria. Again, protection against microbes and other foreigns because of those secretions that inhibit the growth of bacteria. Melanin protects the rest of the cells against UV radiation. The hair on the head is a nice insulator, also protects against UV exposure and abrasion. Our eyebrows keep the sweat out of our eyes. The lashes protect us from foreign substances. And then the hair on the nose and the ear helps protect against dust and bugs. Then the nail protects against protects the ends of those digits and help in self-defense. And then finally, just providing that barrier to diffusion of water, so retaining water. So then the sensation, so again, we get senses to pressure, temperature, pain, heat, and cold, touch, and the movement of hairs. Temperature regulation, so we think about sweating, but also radiation. So the sweat releases heat, and that causes cooling as water evaporates and takes the heat with it. Arterioles in the dermis actually change diameter as the temperature changes, so that alters the amount of blood flow to or from the dermis that again increases or decreases heat. So looking here at a little bit more detail about the heat exchange and how it happens. So the arterioles, again, small arteries of the dermis dilate, so they become thicker, so more blood is going there, so that blood flows from the deeper structures. So that's going to cause heat loss to increase because, again, more blood is being removed. It's releasing that energy. So it results in a reduction of that body temperature. So the body temperature tends to increase as a result, though, of exercise, fever, the external temperature. So in order to maintain that homeostasis, the excess must be lost. So in this case, the body is going to start producing sweat. So the sweat spreads over the surface of the skin, it evaporates, and as it evaporates, the heat goes with the water. Now, when the blood vessels in the dermis constrict, so the opposite happening now less blood is flowing from those deeper tissues. So as a result of that decreased blood flow, the heat loss actually decreases. So thinking about like shivering, we're constricting and keeping the blood internally to keep the heat that it has rather than releasing it outside. So if the body temperature begins to drop below normal, it can be conserved by decreasing the diameter of those blood vessels in the dermis. So if it's too hot, the vessels dilate to release the heat, release the water. If it's cold, they constrict or become smaller to keep the blood on the internal surfaces. And now looking at the vitamin D production. So again, this starts at the skin. It also helps with calcium absorption. So these typically go together. So if we're drinking milk, most milk has vitamin D added because it helps increase the amount of calcium that gets absorbed. It is a hormone called calcitrol. So it stimulates the uptake of calcium and phosphate. So again, taking them together helps get more calcium from the milk. But then it also causes those to be released from the bone, as well as decreasing calcium loss. So overall, it's increasing the amount of calcium levels in the blood. It's just doing it in a few ways. One, by increasing uptake, releasing it from the bones, and then preventing the loss from the kidneys. Now, how it happens is a compound called 7-dehydrocholesterol. So think about cholesterol. Gets a bad rap, but we need a little. It actually converts to what is called cholecalciferol. So it only happens though whenever it's exposed to the UV radiation. So without that UV exposure, we're not going to get that reaction occurring. So then it gets released to the blood, then it goes from the blood to the liver, as well as the kidneys to actually make the active form of vitamin D, which is calcitrol. So when I mentioned about Alaska, but people in cold climates or those who cover the body can be deficient, but calcitrol can be absorbed through the intestinal wall as well. So it can come from our food, not just from exposure to the sun. So dairy, consuming liver, because that's where other animals have made it, eggs, egg yolks, and various supplements can provide it as well. So again, looking here at the production of that vitamin D, so the synthesis involves that precursor molecule, that 7-dehydrocholesterol, But again, that gets stored on the skin, and it's stored there because in order to activate it, we need that UV exposure. So then when it's exposed to the UV, it gets converted to the cholecalciferol. Again, that gets released in the blood. It then travels to the liver, where it gets modified, and then it goes on to the kidneys, where it re-enters for transport. And then at the kidneys, it's again modified to where we actually get the final active form of vitamin D3 or calcitrol. All right, now looking at our other one, so excretion, again, we mentioned a little bit already, but this is just that removal of waste. So we think about the release of sebum and some of our sweat, but in addition to water that is mainly in there, there are other waste products there as well. So it has, in our sweat, we have not only water and salt, but also urea and ammonia and uric acid from the breakdown of proteins. So again, some waste products, majority goes to our kidneys and urine, but some also can get removed in our sweat. So it's insignificant though when compared to the kidneys. So there is a little bit, but by far kidneys are the main excretion or excretory organ. All right, now looking a little bit at what happens during burns. So essentially we get different levels of burn. So we have 1st degree and 2nd degree burn. So this is where there's kind of a partial kind of thickness. Full thickness though leads to that 3rd degree burn. And then we can even get 4th degree burn where we're getting those deeper structures past the epidermis down into the dermal tissue. And this is when those skin grafts, so like splint skin from another part of the body or artificial skin or even from cadavers or pigs to replace that. Then the effects on aging with the integumentary system. So the skin's more easily damaged as we get older, and that's because the epidermis thins due to the decreased amount of collagen. So that increases infections because, again, one of the functions is protection. So if it's not as thick, there's less protection. Of course, we get wrinkling, and that's due to the decreased elasticity of our elastic fibers. It starts to dry out. As we age, our skin gets much drier. We get decreased blood supply. Of course, we don't have any in the epidermis, but even to the dermal tissue. So that causes poor ability to regulate body temperature. So typically older individuals are colder, again, because that blood supply is decreasing. The melanocytes generally decrease. So this causes things like age spots where we get that increased melanin production that can occur. And then also the sunlight ages skin more rapidly. So people who work outside and are exposed to the skin typically have more wrinkles, have more of these effects than someone who has like an office job and is rarely outside.